This happened while I was living alone in a little rental house far outside of town. It was a one-story structure at the end of a short dead-end street. The street only had 5 residences and was usually quiet at night. I worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, so I rarely out except to acquire groceries. I didn't get many visits. My pals generally texted before they came over. This is why the first knock stood out. It was around 8:45 p.m. on Thursday. I was in the living room watching TV when I heard 4 solid knocks on the front door. I turned off the TV and waited, wondering whether it was all in my head. Then there were 2 more knocks. I got up and went to the door. There's a little peephole in the center. When I glanced through, I noticed a man standing on my porch, clutching a medium-sized cardboard box. He wore a dark jacket and a baseball cap. He appeared normal, possibly in his mid-30s. I opened the door while keeping the chain on. He instantly stated that he had a delivery that required a signature. He read a name from a little handheld device. It was not my name. It was not even close. I informed him that he had the wrong address. He looked down at the box, then at the device, and then back at me. He read the address aloud. That was my exact address. I told him that no one with that name lived here. He looked at me for a second longer than was necessary. Then he stated he must have been given incorrect information and would return it to the vehicle. I watched him stroll back down the driveway. I anticipated to see a delivery van or a car parked close, but there was nothing. He strolled past my mailbox before turning the corner at the end of the block. I did not see where he went. I shut and closed the door. I convinced myself it was just a small company delivery or possibly a contractor driver without a marked vehicle. The following night, at almost the same time, there were 3 more knocks. This time, I didn't open the door immediately. I went to the peephole first. It was the same man with the same jacket and box. I did not open the door. I merely spoke through it, telling him he had already stopped by and that no one with that name lived here. He did not respond right away. Then he stated all he needed was a signature and that the system indicated the shipment had to be delivered tonight. I told him I wouldn't sign for someone I didn't know. There was a prolonged pause. Then he said okay and stepped away from the door. I remained at the peephole rather than leaving immediately away. He stood at the edge of the porch, looking at the house. He gently shifted his head toward my front windows, then the side of the house, and finally back to the door. After about 15 seconds, he began walking down the driveway again. I observed no vehicles. That's when things started to seem wrong. On the 3rd night, there was no knock. I truly felt relieved. I wondered if he had worked out the mistake. I even made a joke to myself about how strange it would have been if he showed up again. On the 4th night, I was in the kitchen cleaning dishes at 9 p.m. when I heard 4 knocks. It was not on the front door. It was located on the side of the home, near the dining room window. I moved gently into the dining room and peeked out the window, but no one was present. Then there were 4 more knocks on the front door. I looked through the peephole, and it was him again, but this time he wasn't holding a box. His hands were empty. I said nothing, and he knocked again. Then he took a step back and looked squarely through the peephole. I moved away from the door, so he couldn't see me and didn't make a sound. After approximately 30 seconds, he turned to walk away. I waited a whole 5 minutes before inspecting the windows. I wandered around the home with the lights turned out and glanced through the blinds. I noticed him standing across the street, near the tree. He was just standing there, facing my house. After about a minute, he went away into the darkness. I relocked every window and door, even if they were already locked. The following day, I called the local police non-emergency number and explained what had happened. The officer I spoke with indicated it sounded like someone was trying to verify occupancy. He stated that sometimes criminals will knock to check if anyone answers before attempting to break in later. He urged me to install cameras if possible and to contact 911 if the man returned. That night, I turned off all of the lights in the front of the house and stayed in my bedroom until 8:45, exactly on time. There were 4 knocks. I did not answer at all. After a few seconds of more than silence, I waited around a minute. Then I overheard something else. A faint thud on the back of my house, and then another. I realized it sounded like someone was testing the rear door. I took my phone and strolled silently into the corridor. I could hear the rear door knob spin slowly, then stop and turn again. I called 911 as directed and muttered that someone was attempting to enter my house while I was on the phone. The knocking began again at the front door. The dispatcher informed me that officers were on the way. The back doorknob kept turning. There was more than one individual. Then I heard metal scrapping lightly against the door frame. Everything ceased after around 30 seconds. Even though it was completely silent, I remained on the phone until the police arrived. When they checked the outside of the house, they discovered new pry marks on the rear door near the handle. The police informed me that if I hadn't been home, the door would have been forced open. They drove about and didn't see anyone odd. The next night, I remained in my brother's apartment across town. I didn't notify anyone on social media or anywhere that I wasn't home. I had barely left at 9 p.m. when my phone called. It was my neighbor 2 homes down. She said there was someone standing on my porch, pounding constantly. She stated that he had been there for at least 5 minutes. She inquired if I was home. I told her no and inquired whether he had a vehicle. She claimed she hadn't seen one. I told her to call the cops. Officers approached and questioned him. Later that night, an officer contacted to tell me that the man said he was delivering a box but had misplaced it. He didn't have a company ID or a designated vehicle. They advised him to stay away from the property. 2 days later, police nabbed him in a nearby neighborhood when he was discovered attempting to break into a house while the owner was away in his car. They discovered several empty cardboard boxes and a small portable scanner that was not associated with any legitimate delivery firm. During inquiry, he acknowledged to knocking first with a bogus parcel. If someone answered, he'd depart and designate the house as occupied if no one responded. After several attempts, he would return later and force entry. He informed officers that he would occasionally knock numerous nights in a row to observe if the pattern altered. If the lights were on one night and turned out the following, he assumed that the house was unoccupied. Hearing that made me realize how close I was to leaving home that first week. If I had ignored the door on one of those early evenings, he would have returned later, expecting to find no one there. I moved out of that house 3 months later, when my lease expired. I still don't answer the door at night unless I know who is coming over. If someone knocks suddenly, I remain silent and examine the cameras first. And if anyone ever shows up with a package with my address but not my name, I won't even go near the door. This story begins in the build-up to Christmas. To set the scene, I live near Glasgow, Scotland. I live with my parents, siblings, cats, and dogs. We're a close-knit family that spends many nights together in the living room, watching TV, playing games, and catching up on our lives. I was 16 when this narrative was written, about to turn 17. I was in high school, but I was getting ready to leave and pursue my education elsewhere. In the days leading up to Christmas, we were watching A Christmas Carol on one of our late evenings together. We regularly have movie evenings around Christmas, and it's one of my favorite aspects of the season. During the movie, we heard a knock on the door. This wasn't exceptional, so we didn't give it much thought. My mother got up to answer it, but no one was there. The street was deserted. Our garden extends from the front of the home to the back, so she also checked the side of the house. But nobody was there either. She returned inside, and we resumed the movie. A few days later, I was sitting at the living room table working on my exam when I heard another knock. I interrupted my work and went to answer the door, but no one was there. We assumed it was a prank by neighboring kids. Where I come from, kids get bored and cause mischief instead of finding something else to do. In Scotland, there is a game called Chappie in which children knock on someone's door and run away giggling. It's ridiculous, but as a kid, the adrenaline rush of someone opening the door to no one can be strangely enjoyable. We have a family group chat where we keep each other updated on events, and numerous family members mentioned having the same experience during the week. The one that jumped out the most was something my father experienced at the time. My father frequently remained up longer than everyone else, either playing Xbox or watching television when the house was quiet. One night about 11 o'clock, when the street was quiet and all the children were inside, he heard a very gentle knock. He was perplexed because he glanced via the peephole before opening the door and saw no one. He slowly unlocked and opened the door, looking outside. Again, no one was around, just a calm, empty street. He locked the door and went upstairs to see whether anyone heard it. However, no one else had heard the knock. We became concerned when this happened on a regular basis. Apart from the knocking, no one had ever seen or heard anyone outside. Typically, when children do this, they laugh or run away. It felt strange. Everything intensified on Christmas Day. We spent the day with family, opening presents, exchanging gifts, watching movies, playing games, and eating far too much. It was a wonderful day. Later that night, I felt sick from overeating, as I do every Christmas. So I went upstairs and lay down. I dozed off and awoke hours later. When I checked my phone, it read 2:01 a.m. Everyone else was in bed, and the house was utterly quiet. I knew I wouldn't be able to fall back asleep because, once awake, it's difficult for me to sleep again, no matter what time it is. I lingered on my phone in the dark, scrolling social media instead of turning on the TV, watching Christmas present haul videos, and contacting pals who were still up. It's typical to appreciate the leisure of Christmas vacation before returning to tests and routines. After a while, I heard a faint knock. I wasn't sure if it came from my door, my window, or if I had dreamed it. I sat up upright in bed, peering into the dark room, my heart beating. I did not want to move. I knew no one should be outside at that hour on Christmas night. I wasn't sure if the events of the previous few weeks were playing on my mind, or if there was someone inside the house. My room was on the second floor, therefore someone being at my window was highly implausible. After what felt like an eternity, I finally mustered the confidence to open my bedroom door. As I did, I heard what sounded like footsteps ascending the stairs. My brain immediately concluded it was my father coming up to bed after staying up late, as he often did. I walked into view of the stairway to inform him that I was still awake and heard the knocking again. That's when I understood it was not my father. I had never seen this man before. I felt nauseous as soon as I saw him. I wondered whether this was the person doing all the knocking. He was already in the house. He was wobbling as he climbed the stairs and appeared severely intoxicated. I gently backed inside my room, thankfully without his noticing me, and softly shut the door. I could hear him strolling about and unlocking doors, entering each room one at a time. I recall thinking it was only a matter of time before he got to me. I completely froze and had no idea what to do. It felt like my common sense had vanished. I opened my door slightly and saw him emerge from my younger sister's room. That's when my head finally got back into gear. I dashed to my parents' room and roused them up, telling them there was a man in the house. My mother awoke promptly, while my father remained sluggish. We went downstairs together and discovered the man passed out on the couch, with my father's beers open and spread around him. My mother shouted at him to go out. He awoke briefly and fiercely argued that the house belonged to him. We tried to lift him, but he was entirely dead weight. My mother hit him in an attempt to rouse him up, but he hardly responded. A few minutes later, my father walked downstairs, saw what was going on, and promptly took charge of the situation. He yelled at the man that this was not his residence and threatened to leave. The man refused. My father eventually had to physically remove him from the couch and drag him out the side door. He forced him out and cautioned him not to return before closing the door. We believed it was over, but seconds later, glass broke at us. The man punched through the window, bringing broken glass inside. He put his face within the broken glass like something out of a movie, while my father ran to call the cops. The man began making hostile threats, claiming that he now owned the house, knew what we looked like, and would return. Needless to say, we were all shocked. It was difficult to imagine that someone would do this on Christmas night. Eventually, he left, and the cops arrived. They took statements from each of us. Mine was the longest since I first saw him. Not long later, the police left. Fortunately, because it was winter, it snowed that night, which is unusual where we live, as we normally get slush. There was a distinct trail of blood down the street. Police tracked it to a nearby playground, where they discovered the man laying on the ground with blood and glass in his hands. They apprehended him and later revealed that they felt he was the invader. Our window was replaced the following morning. We told my siblings what occurred. Surprisingly, they slept the entire time, most likely due to the abundance of holiday food. Later, I received a restraining order against the man because of my age and the threats he issued. He was punished for the damage and sentenced to community service instead of jail time. When authorities questioned him about the weeks of knocking on our door before to the incident, he claimed he knew nothing about it and denied ever doing so. It came out that he had lived in our house for years before we moved there. He denied any wrongdoing and said that he had simply drunk too much while out with friends and ended up in the wrong residence by accident. Thankfully, no one in our family was significantly injured. The only injury was a bruise on my mother's wrist from slapping him while wearing bracelets. Apparently, this pains you more than the person you struck. We still have no explanation for the knocking before that night. Even now, I feel like I hear a knock late at night. Perhaps that is simply in my head, or perhaps it is not. I guess I'll never know if he or someone else was watching. This occurred around the year 10, when I was approximately 6 years old. My family and I lived in a modest neighborhood in Springfield, Oregon. It was my older brother, sister, mother, and my father was deployed at the time, so I was really close to him and often felt his absence. Late one night, I sat on the porch with my mother while she smoked a cigarette, and we watched the rain while sitting there, cold but content in each other's company. We saw a man wandering in the center of the street. He was wearing one of those enormous yellow raincoats. It immediately drew our notice because it was pouring rain late at night and no one else was out. We sat there, watching him walk slightly toward our driveway. My mother stood up, grabbed my hand, and extinguished her cigarette as we watched the man come to a halt in our driveway, just close to our garbage cans. My mother turned to take us inside, and the man started yelling at us. I'm not sure what he said, but I remember being horrified as my mother rushed me inside. When we arrived inside, my mother shut the door and turned out all the lights. At this moment, I was afraid, and, of course, like a child, I started crying. My mother rushed my siblings and me, shushing us, and we all went to lay in my parents' king-sized bed together since we were all concerned, but nothing else happened. There was no more yelling or noise, so we all went to sleep. That night, I experienced a dreadful nightmare that I can still remember to this day. It was of a man wearing a large yellow raincoat staring through our window. I awoke afraid and weeping, shaking my sister up to tell her I was worried. I have no notion how much time has passed. My sister got out of bed and took me to the bathroom, which was attached to the bedroom. She shut the door and spoke to me as I cried, hoping not to disturb my mother or brother. But when we were inside, we heard thumping. There was a loud banging on the front door. My sister stormed out of the bathroom and began shaking my mother awake without saying anything, and my brother, of course, awoke to the sound. I sat in the bathroom, afraid, as my mother motioned for my siblings to join me. We saw her move out of the room and towards the front door. My siblings and I were all in tears, terrified, as this man continued to hammer on the door. My mother must have been looking for her old BlackBerry phone, but apparently failed because when she returned, she didn't have it. That meant none of us could call the police because this was the sole phone in the house. We sat there in silence, listening to the man who was now screaming and yelling for us to let him in while continuing to hammer on the door. It was a truly bleak and terrible night. It was just the 5 of us, no phone to call the cops, and my father, who is usually our guardian, was gone. We sat on the floor, hunched together, freaking out and praying that our neighbors would contact the police. But nothing occurred. Eventually, the man fled, but no police arrived. It was weird since it was a small community with everyone living close together, and our house was a duplex. So how no neighbor heard this and alerted the cops is beyond me. We eventually fell asleep, and everything was fine for a time, but not until a few weeks later. Still, just the 5 of us at my house. My family awoke to find my front door wide open, a window open, and a large hole cut through the window screen. My mother immediately contacted the police. There were several random objects missing, including my piggy bank, which contained all of my Christmas monies, as well as other stuff around the home. But the most frightening missing item was a massive vase loaded with cash and coins that my family had been accumulating for months. The most upsetting part was that it was on my nightstand directly close to my bed, where we were all sleeping. This happened a long time ago, and my mother has since passed away, and my father was not present at the time. So I'm not sure what other information I may have missed. I know the intruder was never caught. I'm also not sure if the man who harassed us that night was the same person who broke into our home weeks later. It could be connected or disconnected. I know that none of us were hurt, which makes me wonder whether it was the same person, considering that man appeared forceful for someone who only wanted money. On the other hand, I later saw what appeared to be the same huge face sitting on the porch of a neighbor, a man who lived alone and whom we never saw. So who knows? This happened to me almost 3 years ago, almost to the day, while I was in Idaho on a full-time mission. My buddy, who I'll call Spencer, and I were assigned to a little town, so there wasn't usually anything to do. On top of that, I was going through a difficult moment. For example, low self-esteem and difficulty sleeping. As a result, we found it difficult to stay out all day for work. Another thing about where we were allocated was that we were living in a real house, although a little one. Usually we only get apartments, but I believe a house was the only option in this area, most likely because there were no apartments nearby. The house's layout was pretty straightforward. As you walked through the front door, you entered the main room where our desks were, and our bedroom was immediately to your right. If you kept walking straight, you would come across a large open doorway that led directly into the kitchen. The bathroom was to your right, while the laundry room was to your left. And that was it. There's also one storage closet in the kitchen. Another detail was that while the house was technically on its own lot, the landlord's house was right next door. And if we had any problems, we could simply walk over or call him. On this particular night, I was on my phone at my desk in the living room, with my chair turned to face the kitchen, while Spencer was on his phone in the bedroom. It had gotten dark outside a few hours earlier, so we returned home and relaxed before going to bed. In the middle of whatever I was doing, I heard a single knock on the window above the sink. And because of the way the house was laid out, you could see the entire living area from where I sat. I looked up at the window for a few seconds and only saw darkness. I returned to what I was doing and began to suspect that it was just a branch or something. There were large trees behind the house, but the more I considered it, the more unlikely it appeared. None of the trees were close enough to the house to brush the window in that way, and it would not have made a knock sound like the one I heard while thinking about it. I heard another knock around the corner at the laundry room window. The full scope of what was going on was finally becoming clear, but my mind was still searching for an explanation that did not imply that someone was outside circling the house, stalking my companion and me. I began to tell Spencer what I had heard in the living room, but as I was, another knock came from the window in the living room, the one directly next to me. I couldn't see who was on the other side, and didn't want to. I jumped up and dashed into the bedroom, locking the door. I asked Spencer if he had heard it, and he said yes. We began debating what to do. We only had a couple of knives as weapons, and we had no idea how many people were out there or whether they were armed. So confronting them on her own was out of the question. During our conversation, the knocking sound moved from the window in the living room to the front door, and we became increasingly alarmed. We briefly considered calling the cops, but we were in the middle of nowhere, and it would take them forever to get there to assist us. Spencer then remembered that we had the landlord's number. He called him and began explaining the situation. We hadn't heard a knock on the door in a few minutes, but I knew what that meant and was dreading it. When it finally arrived, there was a knock at her bedroom window. The blinds were drawn, so we couldn't see who it was, and they couldn't see us. But this didn't make me feel much better. Spencer informed him that someone was stalking the house, and that he would be out shortly with a shotgun. We waited a few more minutes, expecting another knock, but nothing happened until our landlord came to the door and announced himself. We asked if he had seen anyone, and he said no, but he did see a pickup truck speed away as he approached the house. I asked if he had obtained a license plate or any other information that could assist the police, but he said they were already too far away for him to see anything. Spencer and I grabbed our flashlights and went around the house with him. A few days earlier, a weather system had left small patches of snow on the ground, and we could see footprints circling the house. And from what we could tell, there was only one set. We considered calling the cops, but we knew they wouldn't be much help in finding the guy. The landlord told us to call him again if the guy came back. So we went back inside, locked everything up, and tried to sleep, but we couldn't. The first thing that came to mind was other missionaries pulling pranks on us. But if that's the case, why didn't they reveal themselves or say gotcha at some point? Additionally, it was past curfew. Everyone was supposed to be at home, and the nearest missionaries to us were at least 20 minutes away. The other possibility was that it was some teenagers from the ward playing a prank, but that seemed unlikely as well, especially after they would have returned and started laughing at us. We only found one set of footprints. If it was a prank, I believe it would have been a group activity afterward. No one ever fessed up when we did some asking around. So to this day, we still have no idea who was outside or why they chose to harass us. But the scariest thing to me wasn't the knocking or how the only thing separating us from him was a thin layer of glass, but the fact that I likely looked right at this guy when he first knocked on the window in the kitchen and didn't even know it. From that day forward, my sleep only got worse. Nothing worked, and my own personal issues did not improve either. I'm not sure I'll ever go back to that house.